Hi, Rabbi.
Hi, Eve. Mrs. Wexberg, how are you? It's wonderful to see you.
Oh, I'm eating it up. I am so excited being able to listen to you. You have no idea.
Oh, my God. Only my wife felt that way.
Well,
My God.
I would like to, when you have a chance, I'd like 10 minutes of your time, but not as part of the session. I would like to share something with you.
Okay.
When it's convenient. I don't want to, I know how crazy busy you are. But
Okay.
I have something personal that ties into one of your lectures of 3 weeks ago that I really would love to share. I think you would enjoy it.
I would appreciate that. Thank you.
So I'll call the synagogue and say, leave a message for the rabbi.
Okay.
Thank you very much. How is Nina?
Thank you. She's very, very well. Thank you so very much for asking.
I remember your parents because of the Shapiros. I Heike, and I didn't know your parents.
Today's my mother's yard site, actually. So I remember her with great love.
But I remember her because we were with the Shapiro, very close with Myra and Wally.
Oh, very special people. Very, very special people. Yeah, my mother still is around, though. She yells at me every morning, so I know that she's still in the world.
And do you listen?
Oh, God, no.
I didn't think. Why things don't change that much?
Right. That's exactly right.
Eddie, your mother was one of the great volunteers for me at Jewish Family Service.
Which, of course, is the funniest thing in the world because she's a bakery lady.
I know.
So she already did therapy for people. She used to do it over birthday cakes. Then you just taught her how to do it without the birthday cake. That was
she still brought the goodies. That was her therapy for the staff.
Are you with JFS? Are you with JFS?
She was for many, many years, yes.
Because my daughter is a senior manager at JFS, Margaret Avenari.
Are you serious?
It's my daughter.
Of course, she's one of my best friends.
We're in the business of making shidduchim. Don't you see how this works?
Eve, I didn't see your name there. I think I've met you.
Of course, I know you.
I know you too.
We all know each other. We're all at Mount Sinai.
Okay, now we're taking away from your time, so I'm going to shut
up. No. It's quite okay. It's okay. We were all at Mount Sinai together, so that's why we all know each other. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome. It's good to have you together. This is a ILOVEVBS Shalom live online. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein, and this is a College of Jewish Studies where we offer university-level Jewish learning without the quizzes, sororities, fraternities, or parties. So thank you for joining us tonight. Hope everybody is doing well, taking very good care. Our thoughts and prayers, of course, are with our family and friends in Israel who are getting just bombarded. And so many friends I know are spending the nights in bomb shelters and in stairwells, holding frightened children. So let's pray that peaceful spirits gather and force a ceasefire and bring this to a conclusion so that we can continue to nurture and create life instead of destroy it. Amen. A couple of announcements of things going on in the community so that we all understand. Here at ILOVEVBS Shalom, Friday night, we're going to be doing a service that we cherish every year. It's our Siyum for 12th graders. So if you're a member of VBS or you're in the neighborhood and you have a 12th grader, call the synagogue and register. And we would be delighted to have you come with us and receive a blessing and a special gift. And it's a wonderful service. It begins at 6 o'clock. And everyone else is invited to watch us online on Facebook and YouTube. Shabbos, of course, we do Torah study. This coming weekend, at the end of the weekend, is the beginning of the holiday of Shavuot. Shavuot, of course, is the holiday of the giving of Torah. And the tradition has always been in Jewish, always, for the last 500 years in Jewish life, is to spend the evening learning together. We do a Tikkun Leil Shavuot. We're going to be doing this in person and online. We'd love to have you come in person. We still have room. So if you go to the VBS website, click on Shavuot and register. We begin at 7 o'clock at VBS. We're going to learn for an hour. We're going to daven, have a COVID-safe snack, learn for another hour, and then all of us are going to head home, and Rabbi Farkas is going to teach us online for another hour for those who are hardy and want to stay up very late. But we'd love to have you with us. Lots of room still. So please check in and let us know if you can come. We'd be delighted to have you there. The topic has about building a home for God in the world. And we're going to be talking about what that means. So, and how one goes about doing that, and what are the ethics of creating divine life here in the world, a place for God in the world. So please join us. It would mean a great deal. It would mean a great deal. So tonight, what I'd like to do is to take up the issue of Jewish ethics. And next week will be our closing session, our last session of the series. And we're going to talk about the biggest kinds of issues, the existential issues of the meaning of life, and how one finds a sense of purpose in life. When we talk about ethics, talk about doing the right thing. In Jewish tradition, it includes Talmud Torah. There's the question of the Talmud is, what's more important, Talmud Torah or Masim Tovim, the learning of Torah or the doing of deeds of kindness. And the tradition said, well, Talmud Torah is more important because it leads to the doing of kindness, which is a beautifully paradoxical answer. But what they meant by that was that moral reasoning, the way that we are taught to think morally, has an important impact on the kind of moral people that we are. And that part of the purpose of the tradition, part of the burden of the tradition, wasn't just to teach us ethics as a set of rules, but to teach us ethics as a way of approaching the world and a way of thinking, a whole pattern of human thought. And so what I want to do tonight is not just talk about what we think is right and wrong, although that's part of what we're here to do, but to trace that pattern of Jewish moral reasoning, and to see where it leads us and what is the element of that, what are the important elements of that pattern of thought. So what we're going to do is a little Talmud study tonight. Now, Talmud study is usually done in chavrusa. You sit across a table, each of us has a book, one of us reads, one of us translates, one of us reads, one of us translates, we argue, we try to interpret, we try to understand it. We'll do this together as a group, in case you ever have a lot of experience doing Talmud study. And one of the initial sections of Talmud that everybody learns when they're just starting out is this section, which is called Elumetzias. It's lost and found law. And it's based on a very simple moral problem, very simple moral problem. You find something that somebody has lost. What are the obligations of the finder? What are the obligations of the loser? When do you have to give it back? When are you allowed to keep it? Is there ever right to say finders keepers? And at what point can you allowed to say that? How do you know when you're allowed to say that? And if you have to give it back, what are all the moral complications of giving it back? So the finders keepers law are found here in the Talmud, and first in the Bible. We find this in Exodus 23, which is Mishpatim, the section that follows the giving of the Ten Commandments. When you encounter your enemy's ox or ass wandering, you must take it back to him. When you see the ass of your enemy lying under its burden and would refrain from raising it, you must nevertheless raise it with him. So the first one is the lost and found law. The second one is a law that pertains to an animal that has collapsed under its burden. When you encounter an enemy's animal, you see it wandering about, bring it back. Okay. Now, the question I'm going to ask you in just a moment is, okay, what are all the complications that could happen in a law like that? Well, just keep that in mind. Here is a elaboration on the same law that comes two books later in the book of Dvarim, the book of Deuteronomy. If you see your fellow's ox or sheep go astray, do not ignore it. You must take it back to your fellow. If your fellow does not live near you, so already now, Deuteronomy has a greater sensitivity to the complications of lost and found law. And it's going to add some complications, some wrinkles to the moral reasoning. If your fellow doesn't live near you, or you don't know who he is, you shall bring it home, and it shall remain with you until your fellow claims it. Then you give it back to him. Okay, so you find somebody's ox or somebody's cow or somebody's sheep wandering about, and you're to bring it back to him. But if you don't know who it belongs to, Or if the person lives far away, you bring it home and you live with it. And it becomes, it's yours for a while. And then when the guy comes and claims it, you got to give it back to him. You shall do the same with his ass, the same with his garment, his shirt, his cloak, the same with anything your fellow loses and you find. Now the question is, anything? Really anything? You must not remain indifferent. You must not turn your back. Now, the warning there is very simple. You find something and you say to yourself, it's too much trouble. It's too much trouble. I remember I went to a gas station once, and I went to the restroom in the gas station, and I found a wallet there. And I picked up the wallet, and I was about to return the wallet, and a thought occurred to me that if I return this wallet and the amount of money that's in the wallet doesn't match what the amount of money the owner thinks should be in the wallet, I could get accused of something. And for a moment, the question is, should I not return it? And then the other question is, well, what would I want somebody if they found my wallet? So I brought it to the clerk and I said, I found this wallet, and the clerk took it and said, okay. And the clerk took it. The question is, and I found, I another time I found one and I put it in the mail and I just mailed it to the person. I didn't want to be accused of anything. So these are complications. Don't remain indifferent. Don't just let it go. Because this whole notion of the ownership of property and who owns the property and what is my obligation if I determine that if I find this thing. This is a very interesting set of questions, is it not? Finally, if you see your fellow's ass fallen on the road, do not ignore it. You can help them raise it. Same laws we had before. All right. What are all the complications of this? So I find a cow, and I don't know who the cow belongs to. So I bring the cow to my house until somebody comes and, now, first of all, what I need to do then is I need to let the world know that I have the cow. So I have to post it someplace. I have to announce. So maybe I go to the marketplace and I say, yo, anybody lose a cow? Or I put a poster up, found one large brown cow or something. And then I wait and see if somebody comes. And I wait. How long do I wait? Forever? A year? 2 years? Who feeds the cow while it's in my house? Am I obligated to feed the cow? What if I don't have a cow? Do I have to go buy cow chow? I mean, how much money do I have to invest in said cow in order to fulfill this mitzvah? What if the cow gets sick? Do I have to call the cow doctor? And who's going to pay for that? What if the cow dies? What if I found the cow, brought the cow to my house, fed it, cared for it, but nebuch, the poor animal dies? Am I responsible for the death of said cow? What if somebody comes to the door and says, I heard you found my cow? And I look at this guy and I don't know who this person is. And I say, who are you? And he says, well, I live 2 villages over. And I said, what is your cow doing in my front yard? He said, well, he wanders occasionally. I said, just for curiosity's sake, what color is your cow? And the color that he names is not the color of the cow. Do I have to give it back to him just because he claimed it? What if 2 people come and they both claim the cow? You could think of all the complications. What if the cow has a baby? Do I own the baby, or does the owner of the cow own the baby? It gets a little complicated, don't you think? And that's the point. That's what Talmud is all about. You see, the Bible is not the last word in Jewish tradition, Jewish law and ethics. We have a whole interpretive tradition that rushes in to answer so many of these kinds of questions, or at least to give us guidance. And what it really does, what the Talmudic tradition really does, what happens to you when you start learning Talmud is you start thinking in a certain way. That way of thinking is classic Jewish moral reasoning. So let's see how this works. Now, the Talmud, what we call the Talmud, is really the anthology of 2 books. The first book is called the Mishnah. The Mishnah, or the Mishnah, is a set of laws and rules derived from the Bible, but not quoting the Bible typically, but derived from the Bible, that was codified by Yehuda HaNasi, the great rabbi who led the Jewish community, in the year 200. And it includes all of the opinions of rabbis from Hillel to Yehuda HaNasi. It's about 5 generations of rabbis. And then as soon as that law code got codified, it became the source text for interpretation, and the rabbis began to work on it. But by this time, the Jewish community had split in two, and there was a Jewish community in Eretz Yisrael, in Israel, and a Jewish community in Babylon, in Iraq. And those two communities had great academies who took the laws of the Mishnah and expanded upon them. So imagine if we had the transcripts of all of the court cases, or at least let's say the Supreme Court cases, that were ever decided, and we listed them in a book, in a digest. That's what Talmud is. Talmud is a record of those conversations that the great rabbis had following the publication of the Mishnah and up until about the year 500. And then you get the later traditions of the codifiers and the interpreters who added to that. So let's take a look and see how that works. Everybody ready? Now let's talk about so the Mishnah in Bava Metzia means the middle gate. This has to do with the law of property. It's called Nizikin. It's the law of lawsuits. And believe it or not, Jews have a lot of lawsuits. You know, someone once said there's a new kosher sushi restaurant called Sosumi. You know, so Jews have so many lawsuits that they took the section of the Talmud. They took I thought you were listening. They took the section of the Talmud that dealt with lawsuits, and they divided it into 3 sections: Bava Kama, the first section; Bava Metzia, the second; and Bava Basra, the third section. This is the middle section, chapter 2, and it begins with this question: which lost items belong to the finder, and which one is he liable to proclaim? So right away, the Mishnah divides things you could lose, or things that could be lost and could be found. And it says certain things, if you find them, you immediately gain ownership of it. But certain things, if you find them, you have to hold on to them and proclaim them, advertise that you found it, and wait for the owner to come claim it. Well, which are the things to which finders keepers applies, and which are the things that have to be proclaimed, in which they still belong to the original owner, but you're holding on to it? These belong to the finder. If he finds pieces of fruit scattered about, coins scattered about, small sheaves in the public domain, cakes of figs, baker's loaves, strings of fish, pieces of meat, wool shearings as they come from the farm, stacks of stalks of flax, tongues of purple, that is pieces of purple cloth, these are his, according to Rebbe Meir. So he gives a bunch of examples, 10 examples. Rebbe Yehuda gives us the rule, a rule that goes beyond Rebbe Meir's examples. Rebbe Yehuda says anything that has an unusual trait in it, he is liable to proclaim. How so? If he found a fig cake but had a potsherd inside of it, or a loaf with coins inside of it. So if you look at Rebbe Meir's examples, what do they all have in common? Right? You're parking your car at Trader Joe's, and as you get out of the car, you see that there's like oranges all over this section of the parking lot, pieces of fruit scattered about. Do you have to go and announce that you found these oranges? Answer, no. You could pick them up, they're yours. If you see coins all over the place, pick them up, they're yours. Small sheaves in the public domain, cakes of figs. But Rebbe Yehuda says, except if there's something strange about it, something unusual, something unique. Now, I'm going to ask you in a minute, what's the logic of these two positions? Because that's what the Mishnah is pointing to. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar teaches, any new merchandise lacking a mark of identification, he's not liable to proclaim. So if you park in the Neiman Marcus, I guess they died, didn't they? The Bloomingdale's parking lot, and there is a beautiful sweater lying on the ground, and it's still in the bag, and it has no identification, and the tags are still on it. You gain possession as soon as you find it. You don't have to give it to anybody. Okay. Now, what is the logic of Rebbe Meir's example? Hold on for a moment. Let's take a look at the next Mishnah. Now they ask, what are the things you are liable to proclaim? That is, things I find that don't belong to me the moment I find them. Things that I find that I can hold on to them until the owner comes to claim them, but I never take possession of them. If he found pieces of fruit in a utensil, or a utensil as it is, so there's a jar with fruit in it, or just the jar, coins in a purse, or the purse as it is, a wallet, okay? Piles of fruit. Now, the difference between a pile of fruit, and a scattered fruit. I want you to think about that. Piles of coins, 3 coins, one on top of the other, right? Not necessarily in a fountain in Rome, but 3 coins. Small sheaves in the private domain, not the public domain. So if you find the sheaves on Ventura Boulevard, it's different than if you find the sheaves in my front yard. Homemade loaves, not baker's loaves, homemade loaves, wool shearings as they come from the craftsman shop, jars of wine, jars of oil, these are all liable to proclaim. What's the logic? Anybody figure out the logic? Anybody figure out the logic of the two things? What things do I gain possession of as soon as I find them? And what things do I have to proclaim to the world that I found it so an owner can come get it, which means I don't own it having just found it. You know, the expression possession is 9/10 of the law. It only applies to certain things. What's the rule? What's the law? Stan, you want to give it a try? Go ahead.
Yeah, it seems to me that it's if someone has actually done something to identify, like stacked them up himself or put them in a certain arrangement or done anything that would imply that the person actually did something with the object, that makes it not yours.
Okay. If there's something unique and special about it, the way it's stacked, the way it's kept, that makes it different, that makes it identifiable, that's the difference, right? So if there's a hole in the bottom of my shopping bag and all my Trader Joe's fruit falls out of it, it's impossible for me to say, that was my fruit. I know that fruit. I remember that bell pepper. I remember that bell. How are you going to identify that bell pepper, right? Or coins that were scattered about. But if there's anything that was unique, special about it, that I could say that was mine because it had this in it or about it, that's the difference. Okay, Mr. Parth, you raising your hand?
I am. I just can't get my video on.
Okay, we can hear you. Go ahead, please.
So I was thinking about the overarching message here.
Okay, good.
There are specifics, and this happens, the oranges fall. But is the bigger message, do not remain indifferent? To all of this, there's got to be something that holds it all up. And
right.
What holds it up for me is indifference or the lack thereof.
Excellent. Very, very good point. You notice that in each of the laws of the Torah, that rule was repeated. In fact, it was repeated twice in one of them, right? Do not remain indifferent. Don't turn around. Don't pretend you don't see it. Don't say it's not my problem. So what's being called upon here? You are a citizen of a place. You walk the public domain. You share the public space. You share the social space. Something is expected of everyone who shares the social space. What's expected is a fundamental moral commitment to each other, a fundamental standard of moral decency that is being demanded of everyone who shares our social space. Now, that's one level of it. That's an excellent observation. Thank you. But there's another level of it. So let's take up Stan's suggestion. Fruit scattered about, I don't have to proclaim. It belongs to me the moment I found it, because there's no way to identify it. Fruit that's in a stack, fruit that's in a jar, fruit that's in a bag, that I have to proclaim because the person could come and say, yes, it was in a blue bag and it had my initials on it, or it was in a stack of 10 high, or I can identify it. But let's follow the moral logic of this for a moment. Ready? How do I know? Rabbi Meir gives me 10 examples. but it's clear that he's trying to reach toward a ruling. But he gives me the 10 examples as a way to inductively reach toward the ruling. If the ruling is the stuff that doesn't have anything to identify, it belongs to the finder. But the stuff has some identifying mark, belongs to the owner. Then what is the mental process that I have to go through if I find something in the world? If I find something in the world, and I want to teach you a language, I want to teach you a word. It's really a very helpful word. The word is yeush. Yeush means giving up, surrender, despair.
What's the shorish of that?
Yud Aleph Shin.
Thank you.
Yud Aleph Shin, yeush. Now, what is yeush? Suppose I went to Trader Joe's, and I carried my groceries back out to my car, and I didn't notice that there was a hole in the bottom of the bag, and I didn't notice that all my oranges spilled out onto the parking lot. Now I get home, and I'm putting away my groceries, and I discover, hey, where are the oranges? I know that I had oranges. Where are my oranges? Where are they? And then I notice that there's a hole in the bottom of the bag. Am I likely to run back to Trader Joe's to find my oranges? Answer is probably not. Why? Number one, because someone will probably have picked them up by now. And number two, because I can't identify them in any way. Even if I did find them, even if I did find that Stan Schroeder picked them up, how could I claim them back from him? I couldn't possibly make the case that those were my oranges, and I'm not just some crook coming to steal his oranges. So what's going to happen at that moment is I'm going to say, oh, well, I lost the oranges. Am I a Dunkov? Right? Am I a fool? I lost the oranges. That's called yeush. That's called yeush. So here is the moral principle at work, or the moral reasoning at work, right? When I find something, I have to ask myself, were I the person who lost it, would I be coming to find it? Were I the person who lost it, would I be coming to find it? Or would I say, oh, well, my bad luck, I shouldn't have been so careless? And wherever I can say, oh, well, my bad luck, I shouldn't have been so careless, that object then belongs to the finder. But if I say, yeah, if I had lost that, I would go back and look for it because it's valuable, it's identifiable, it has something interesting about it, well, then that object still belongs to the owner. It still belongs to the owner. You see? That's the process. That's the mental process. But now think for a moment with me about that mental process. What is that mental process asking me to do? It's saying, here is the simplest moral transaction there is. Somebody lost something, somebody found it, right? But that simple moral transaction demands a quality of character, which we call empathy. It is whether I can project my own sensibility into a theoretical person that I can imagine and ask myself, were I in his position, were I in her position, would I be looking for the object or would I be giving up on the object? And more than just giving back lost items, the rabbis are deeply committed to the cultivation of empathy, the cultivation of a person who walks in the world and says, I wonder what that person feels like. Were I him, were I her, how would I respond to that position? How would I want someone to treat me? How would I expect the world to treat me? What would make me angry? What would make me sad? What would make me peaceful? What would reconcile? And that process of empathy, of projecting my own sensibility into somebody else's circumstance, that kind of empathy, that ultimately is the ultimate end, the ultimate result of this process. That's really what this process is all about. And let's take a moment. Mr. Porat, did you have another question?
Yes, I did.
Please.
Thank you. So that's the juxtaposition of the being indifferent totally means you just walk away. You don't go through this process. That's the other side of not to be indifferent. But you do show that you are not indifferent by confronting these choices.
Right. You confront the choice and you engage in the mental process.
Yeah.
You don't just say to hell with it, leave it in the bathroom. You ask yourself, now what am I called upon to do here?
That's the essence of it.
The lost object presents the finder with a moral circumstance which he has to reason through. And the reasoning process demands a quality of empathy. Now, let's take another look into the text and see how that bears out. Okay? Everybody okay so far? Okay, any other questions before we move on?
Rabbi?
Yes, please. Who's talking?
Eve Wexberg.
Yes, Mrs. Wexford. Hi.
You don't call me Mrs. Wexberg. But, no, I'm not old enough for that.
Thank God.
I don't know whether this fits into it, but in some way, we're tested all the time with the virus that we've been facing, the life that we're leading. We're very often called upon to make a decision, even under those, can we help? And example, I don't know whether this is too simplistic, but the ethics of how you handle yourself in the times of this particular crisis that we've been facing for 15 months, I think we're tested all the time in some way. I don't know whether that fits into Talmudic study, but that's how I feel.
Well, it's a wonderful observation. Thank you. You know, if I were a person with certain sensitivities, my son is a diabetic, for example, I worry about him.
Yeah.
Right. So the question is, I wear a mask because I'm worried about him. I'm not wearing a mask for my own protection. I'm really worried about him. I project myself into the circumstance of another person and ask myself, how would I want to be treated were I him? How would I want to be treated were I him? That's the answer.
Yeah. Well,
that's the moral principle at work here.
Yeah.
The moral principle is the cultivation of a certain quality of empathy, which goes far beyond observing certain rules and laws. Ethics isn't about rules and laws because you couldn't possibly imagine all the circumstances that life will bring you. But if I create a person who thinks in a certain way and develops a capability of thinking in a certain way, empathy, thinking about how another person experiences a circumstance, that gives that person that gives us an ethical tool to use in almost every circumstance. Now, I want to show you how the Talmud works now. Now the Talmud's going to go to town, because so far we've talked about the quality of the item, right? Whether it is identifiable or not. Now it's a question of where you found it, right? If behind a fence or a hedge, one found pigeons tied together, people used to raise pigeons. So if you found a bunch of pigeons, and it depends on where you found them, right? If he found a utensil in a dung heap, okay, you found a utensil in a trash can. If it's covered up, he should not touch it. If it's uncovered, he can take it, right? If he found debris in an old wall, if he made a new wall and it's located the midpoint onward. Anybody here ever listened to Car Talk on NPR? Remember Car Talk? It was the most popular radio program on National Public Radio. Ray and Tom Magliazzi. It was on Sunday mornings. So they had a guy who called in with the following case. I'm not making this up. This isn't Talmudic. The guy bought a Cadillac used from a private owner, and he drove the Cadillac. One day he had a flat tire. So he pulled off to the side of the road, and he opened the trunk to get the jack and the spare tire. And when he opened the trunk to get the jack and the spare tire, he found a bag with $10,000 in cash. Now, this is years after he bought it. He found a bag with $10,000 in cash hidden under the spare tire. And he called Ray and Tom Magliazzi, the Car Talk guys, and asked them, do I have to give it to the guy that I bought it from? Or can I keep it? Really interesting, right? So that's the question, right? Where did you find it? And is it the kind of thing that somebody has probably given up on by now, right? How about this one? Remember the days when storekeepers used to work in stores? So you'd walk into a store and there'd be a counter, right? The storekeeper stood behind the counter and you said, I want this and this and this. And the storekeeper went and got it for you. It's before self-service stores were invented. Well, what if you find something in a store? What if you find an object in a store? You find a head of lettuce, right? If he finds it on one side of the counter, it belongs to him. But if he finds it on the other side of the counter, it belongs to the storekeeper. What if you go to a money changer and you find a $10 bill on the ground? What if you go to a bank? What if you go to a bank and you find a $10 bill on the ground? Do you have to give it back to the bank? Do you keep it? Do you have to go and tell everybody I just found a $10 bill, right? Depends on where it is, right? And then the question is, how long do I have to hold on to it? How long do I have to hold on to an animal? What do I have to do to protect the animal during the time that I have it? So the basic moral rule here is, I ask myself, at what point does the owner of the object say, I'm never going to find my cow. I'm never going to find my oranges. I'm never going to find my bag of $10,000. Or if the guy who lost it forgot all about it and never remembered that he even had it, if that is the moral reasoning, you can keep the money, you can keep the oranges, you can even keep the cow. The purpose of this is to cultivate a certain quality of moral empathy and a certain tool of moral reasoning, which gives us the tool to approach all moral circumstances. So here now is the principle. And it's a principle I think that you all probably have encountered at one point or another. This is in Exodus chapter 22, just before the law we just read. This is right after the 10 Commandments. This is given at Mount Sinai right after we exited from Egypt. You will not wrong a stranger or oppress him, for you are strangers in the land of Egypt. You will not ill-treat any widow or orphan. If you do mistreat them, I will heed their outcry as soon as they cry, and my anger shall blaze forth, and I'll put you to the sword, and your own wives shall become widows and orphans. That's God's threat, right? If you lend money to my people, to the poor among you, do not act toward them as a creditor. Exact no interest. If you take a neighbor's garment in pledge, return it to him before the sun sets. It is his only clothing, the sole covering of his skin. In what else shall he sleep? Therefore, if he cries out to me, I will pay heed, for I am compassionate. And then the next chapter elaborates on the same rule. You will not oppress a stranger, for you know the feelings of the stranger, having yourselves been strangers in the land of Egypt. Well, there's two sets of reasons here. I want you to see the parallel sets of reasons, right? The one set of reason is, if you ill-treat a widow or an orphan, I will make your kids and your wife that way. That will come back that's karma. That you'll come back, it'll redound to you and you'll suffer what they suffer. That's the sort of floor of ethics. The floor of ethics is pragmatic. The floor of ethics is, I don't want this to happen because I don't want it to happen to me. That's a floor of ethics. But here's the ceiling of ethics. Here's the upper level of ethics. You will not wrong a stranger or oppress him, for you were strangers in Egypt. You will not oppress a stranger. You know the feelings of the stranger, having yourselves been strangers. That's an ethic of empathy. That's an ethic of empathy. You see, you could have written that law in a very different way. You could have written it the way it's written here. If you oppress a stranger, I'll make you a stranger. You could have said what Plato once said. I don't want you to oppress a stranger, a widow, or an orphan because it's wrong. Plato understood that ethics are cognitive. If I know the good, I will do the good. The Bible is skeptical about that. Why? Because I know Coca-Cola is not very good for me, but I drink it anyway. We do a lot of things which we know are not good for us. I shouldn't drive so fast on the freeway, but I'm in a hurry. I do it anyway. Then you have Kantian ethics from Immanuel Kant, German philosopher of the 17th century. I do what my duty is. I do what duty calls me to do. But I know lots of times when I have duty and I don't do what I should have done. The Bible roots ethics in something else. It roots ethics in empathy. Empathy is based on memory. I know what he feels because I was him. And because I was him, a piece of me is always in that circumstance. A piece of me always feels that way. A piece of me always understands the suffering. Stranger, widow, orphan, they're vulnerable. Stranger, widow, orphan cannot redress for grievances. Stranger doesn't have standing in our courts. Widow has no husband to protect her. Orphan has no father to protect them. Stranger, widow, orphan can be abused. They can be taken advantage of. They can be exploited. Don't do it. You can do it and get away with it. Yes, we know you can do it and get away with it, but don't do it. Why? Because when you look at them, I want you to remember who you are. I want you to see yourself in their circumstances. And you were a stranger in the land of Egypt. You remember what it was like to be humiliated. You remember what it was like to be dehumanized, objectified, turned into an object. You remember what it was like to be so powerless that you could not redress any grievance. You couldn't fix it. You couldn't control the conditions of your own existence. Therefore, don't do that to another. Don't do that to another. It's the ethic of empathy. And an ethic of empathy is at the very core of Judaism. It's the very core of Torah. To walk the world and understand that I am called upon to feel the pain of the other because I know that pain myself. Now, how do I know that pain myself? Because I am taught since the time I'm born, because I was a slave in the land of Egypt, because that memory now becomes an active element in the creation of my ethical point of view. An active element in my ethical point of view. And that's why you walk by a person who suffers. That's why we have the quality in us. My Bubby called it Rahmanis, It's a quality of connection with those who suffer. That's part of Jewish ethics. That's, I think, at the heart of Jewish ethics. I think I told this story on Pesach. It's a story that always impresses me. I had a conversation once. A member of our shul, like so many members of our synagogue, has a woman who lives in their home and cleans and takes care of their children. And she's from a Latin American country, El Salvador, someplace. And then this member of our shul, she comes to see me with her maid, with her helper. And this woman, I speak very bad Spanish, rabbi Spanish, right? But I know enough we can talk. So she says to me, I have a cousin who just came to America. She's undocumented, but she came to America to make some money to send it back to her children in wherever she was, Salvador, Guatemala, or Honduras. And she's working for a Jewish family, and they haven't paid her. And she's working for them 6 weeks. And she asks again and again, it's time for me to get paid. We had an arrangement. We had a deal. We had, you owe me the money, And the householder keeps telling her, yeah, I'll pay you. Don't bother me. I'll pay you. And this beautiful woman, this cleaning lady, looks to me and she says in her combination of English and Spanish, she says, Señora Binu, I work now for a Jewish family 10 years. I know Hebreos. Hebreos tienen corazón. Jews have heart. Jews don't do this to the people who work for them. Jews don't do this. And for the first time, I'm embarrassed. I'm sitting in front of a woman who's an undocumented immigrant from God knows where. And I'm embarrassed. Why? Because she knows us. Hebreos tienen corazón. Jews have heart. They don't do this to people. So I pick up the phone. The guy's not a member of my shul. Don't worry. And I call him. And if you have rabbi in front of your name, you can get through secretaries pretty quick. And I get the guy on the phone. I said, listen, it's come to my attention. There's a certain obligation you haven't met. And come on, let's get this done. Oh, of course, I'm so sorry. So for the end, he goes home, he pays her. She quits. She goes to another family. She sends the money to her family. The cleaning lady, she came back to me, Maria came back to me and said, gracias, Rabbi. Jews, Hebreos tienen corazón. This is a beautiful thing, that we pride ourselves and we make ourselves known to the world as people who have a certain moral sensibility. That's what the tradition tries to teach. And that moral sensibility extends beyond It extends beyond just personal morality. It extends beyond personal morality. Here is the law that I think is so quite remarkable. This is Deuteronomy. So this is the repetition of the law we just read. You will not subvert the rights of the stranger or the fatherless. You will not take a widow's garment in pawn. Now, that detail is just delicious. So listen for a moment. Look at that detail. You will not take a widow's garment in pawn. Right? Now, you could pass that by just for a moment, but stop for a second. What? What does that mean? Tell me a story about that. Tell me a story about that. What's the story? She was once a wealthy woman. She lived in a beautiful home. Her husband made a very nice income. They had beautiful children. They sent their kids to expensive schools. She had a nice car. She had beautiful gowns and jewels and art on the wall. She had everything that a fine lady could ask for. And then he died. And he left behind a tax obligation, medical bills, unpaid debts, and she had to pay off those obligations. And once she paid off those obligations, there was very little left, and she had to feed her children. So what does she do? She sells off the fancy gowns, and she sells off the fancy jewels, and she sells off the art, and she moves them from the expensive house to a smaller place, and she takes them out of the expensive school and puts them into public school. And she has a smaller car or no car at all. And when she finishes with all of that, and she still needs income, she still needs wherewithal to feed her children and care for her children, what's the last thing she can sell? Don't take a widow's garment in pawn. She sells, you could say, the shirt off her back. And that's a metaphor, you know. She sells herself. She sells the last thing that a woman has to give. She sells herself because she wants to feed her children. And what does the Bible tell you to do? Look at what the Bible says to you for you to do, right? You will not take a widow's garment in pawn. Don't let anyone fall to that level of degradation. Don't let anyone fall to that level of degradation. Why? Because you were a slave in the land of Egypt and God redeemed you from there. You were redeemed from there. Therefore, you have an obligation to redeem anyone who falls to the level of oppression that you remember from Egypt when you were nothing and had nothing to give but your own bodily energies. Don't let anyone fall to that level of degradation. Now, the Bible is going to have a policy. The Bible is going to tell you how to do this, but I want to point out that there's really no policy. This doesn't say whether it should be welfare, whether it should be workfare. It doesn't say whether you should have public health or private health. It doesn't say, it just says organize a society in such a way that it's not Egypt. Organize a society that you take the example of Egypt and build a society that is its diametrical opposite. A diametrical opposite. Now it gives you a hint. So here's what I want you to do. When you reap the harvest of the field and overlook a sheaf, don't go back and get it. It goes to the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, in order that God may bless you. When you beat down the fruit of the olive trees, don't go over again. It goes to the stranger, the fatherless widow. When you gather the grapes of the vineyard, do not pick it again. It goes to the stranger, the fatherless widow. Always remember you were a slave in Egypt. That's why I give you these commandments. So when you set up an economy, set it up with a mechanism so that the wealth that you earned is shared with those who need it more than you. That the wealth that you earn is there to be shared with those who need it more than you. And do this for two reasons. One, because you are obligated to create a society in which everyone is taken care of and no one is left to fend for themselves the way you did in Egypt. That's number one. That's the social ethic. But there's a personal ethic here too. If you're able to harvest a field and the stuff that falls off the truck, the stuff that you didn't get that first go around, the stuff that wasn't ready, if you're able to let it go and say, that's not mine, that belongs to the stranger, the fatherless, the widow, what does that do to you and to your relationship to your wealth and your property? It tells you, number one, I don't really own this stuff. Everything I own is a gift from God. And this gift comes with strings attached. And the strings are that I have to watch out for those who are more needy than I am. And number two, I don't define myself by all of the wealth that I acquire. If I have enough, that's all I need. I need enough. I need enough. And after I have enough, let everyone else have it. I don't need to gather every sheaf of the field. I don't need to gather every grape of the vine. I don't need to gather every olive on the tree. I can let it go. Because if you're so obsessed with every olive on the tree, so compulsive about every grape on the vine, so greedy for every sheaf in the field, you know what that makes you? It makes you a slave. A slave isn't a guy who owns nothing. A slave is a guy whose possessions own him. And what's being described here is an attitude toward possessions, an attitude toward wealth. You're not defined by your wealth. You're given enough in the world to enjoy, to really enjoy, and you're supposed to enjoy it. You're supposed to enjoy it. There's nothing wrong with enjoying it. Ben and Jerry's ice cream is not a sin. Trust me on this. You're supposed to enjoy it. But you enjoy enough. And when you finish having enough, you open your hand and you open your heart to the ones around you, because you are also obligated to provide for them. You also open the hand, and opening the hand, you create an act of freedom, which is the ultimate act of freedom. It's the ultimate liberation from Egypt. And that's the essence of the Jewish ethic when it comes to this kind of moral thinking. All right, let's take a moment. We got just a few more moments. Any questions, comments, or counter sermons? Stan, yeah, please.
What I was going to say is that what you said in part is that we should live our lives through as if the Seder is all the time. We were there, that was us, and live in that way. Remember, that we were there, not just our ancestors.
Well, that's the ultimate lesson of Pesach, is that we were liberated from Egypt. And what I'm suggesting is that the Torah takes that very seriously, because that experience of having been in Egypt shapes our ethics, shapes our vision of ourselves. It's lived out all the time. Egypt was our classroom for God to teach us a divine ethic that we're to reach toward. Now, it's hard to reach toward a divine ethic because we're human beings. A human being. I have $1 in my pocket. I'm going to hold on to it. That's a human being, right? But the Torah says, but you can be better than that. And how do you know you can be better than that? Because you remember where you came from. You remember what Egypt was like. You remember the oppression of Egypt. And when I see someone who suffers, I can say to myself, I know what that's like. I know what that feels like. I want to hold on. I want to liberate them from their Egypt the way that God liberated me from mine. That's really the ethic. That's really the ethic. Anyone else have questions, comments?
Yeah, Rabbi Feinstein. So if you, in your initial, this is Ilan Rubenstein.
Hi, Ilan. How are you? It's good to see you.
Good to see you too, virtually. A year since I've actually seen you physically.
Anyway, not much to look at. I got news for you. So.
Yeah. So hope your family is doing okay.
Thank you. Thank you for asking. It's really beautiful.
In your initial example, you said that you found a wallet and you gave it to the person behind the counter. To what extent can we do that as opposed to taking personal responsibility?
That's a great question. Thank you. The wallet had no identification in it. It was obviously somebody's wallet, but it didn't have like a driver's license in it. So I couldn't tell whose it belonged to. So my figuring was, here was my moral reasoning. Tell me if I got this right, Ilan. If I had lost a wallet in the bathroom if I'd lost a wallet and I determined that I'd lost it in the bathroom of a gas station, I would go back to the gas station and ask them if they have my wallet, right? So, and there was no way for me to know who lost it. And I'd take it home, it would never get back to the guy. So I thought maybe if I left it with the clerk, someone would come by and find. I don't know if the clerk stole the money. That much I couldn't. But if he was an honest person, then that's where he would go back to, right?
So I was just wondering whether it's if you found it, is it your or my responsibility as opposed to handing the responsibility off to another?
I think it's our responsibility to do what we can to get it back to the owner. And in that circumstance, it was more likely that the owner would come to the gas station than come find me. Right? So that's what we did.
So the larger question that I'm not sure if this is an exact analogy, but the larger question is, when I give tzedakah or do something in the community to make a better world, I can do a little something. The society I live in has organized systems to do those things because there's more money that's aggregated, people
Yes.
that are hired, all that stuff.
Sure.
So I have the general sense that I'm better off having an organized response to hunger, homelessness, as opposed to doing individual stuff. Although the Homelessness Task Force does direct action also. So it's got to be a balance of both. This is a little off topic, I think, but how do you balance it? Because it seems like the system is more effective than the individual.
I appreciate that. It's a very good question. It's a very, and we could spend a great deal of time talking about the ethics of tzedakah. Here, I would urge you to think about the fact that any ethical act has multiple targets. Let's call it targets or consequences, right? At least two that I can think of. The ethical act that I perform is focused on somebody who needs help. And the ethical action that I perform also ends up changing me. It ends up changing me. And now I think that for the first consequence, you're exactly right, right? Instead of going out and building a house with habitat, it makes more sense to devote my time to helping an organization that builds 1,000 houses. Right? Because the problem of homelessness in our community is a generic problem, a systemic problem. It can have greater impact working for an organization that knows what they're doing than putting me on a roof with a hammer. However, putting me on a roof with a hammer, or rather, let's talk about what you just said, putting me in contact with a homeless person, putting me in contact with a family that's come to a homeless shelter and I feed them a meal, giving me that personal, hands-on, face-to-face human experience is going to change my attitude, change my feeling, change my whole orientation to that issue. Change my whole orientation to that issue. All right. I remember going with the teenage kids of the synagogue to serve a meal at a homeless shelter. Now, certainly paid staff could have done a much better job than klutzy Jewish teenagers from Encino, right? That I can guarantee you. But klutzy Jewish teenagers from Encino, standing there in aprons, serving a meal, coming and collecting dirty dishes, chatting with the people in the shelter, having conversations in the food line, offering people seconds, changed those kids in ways that not $100 million of charity could have done. Those kids came to understand this issue in such a personal way and take such personal responsibility for it. So I think that you're exactly right. If I'm looking for the consequence of the action outwardly, maybe the organization does a better job. If I'm looking to change a human being inwardly, I think direct action, direct involvement makes a great deal of sense. And I admire you for thinking about both of those at the same time. And then you got to go figure this out. You got to go figure out how am I going to do this, right? Okay. Yes, please, Mrs. B.
So does it matter whether a person complies with with an action because they're afraid of reprisal or because they have a conviction to do the right thing?
So in what sense is doing a mitzvah dependent upon your kavanah? In what sense is the quality of a charitable act dependent upon your intention? Okay, is that the question?
I think so.
It's a very, very good question. First of all, we use this word charity. The word charity comes from the Latin for core, for heart, because the Christian idea was I'm giving of myself. And so the idea of charity in the Christian context, in some Christian context, is that my heart has to be in it. And if my heart's not in it, it's not a really good act. It's not a mitzvah. It's not a benign act. Okay? The Jewish tradition says no, because the hungry person who's sitting in front of you still needs help, whether you're in the mood or not. Now, will you do the act better if your heart's in it? Yes. Is it a better act if you do it with a smile on your face and treat that person graciously? Yes. But even if you're a sourpuss, and even if you're bitter, you do it anyway. You give tzedakah anyway. Why? Because he needs it. And because you have an obligation to do it, right? You have an obligation to do it, which creates a very interesting sort of dynamic, because then you and he become partners in a certain sense in the carrying of a mitzvah. Remember the opening scene of Fiddler on the Roof? When Tevye says, we have all of our types here in Anatevka. We have the beggar. He says, alms for the poor, alms for the poor. He says, here's a kopek. He said, kopek, 1 kopek. Last week you gave me 2 kopeks. He said, I had a bad week. He said, you had a bad week. Why should I suffer? I mean, that kind of chutzpah is because tzedakah is a partnership. I mean, there are these wonderful stories of rabbis that would give charity and then thank the recipient for accepting it because he allowed me to do a mitzvah, you see? Now that's a kind of, I can't recommend that, because that's a kind of selflessness that nobody understands. But yeah, it's better if your heart's in it. But even if your heart's not in it, it's got to get done. It's got to get done, right? Even if our heart's not in it, this is the right thing to do, and someone's got to do it. It's got to be done. And so that's a Jewish ethic. The Jewish ethic is that the act has a certain quality on its own, regardless of the intention behind it. Although the intention would make it better. The intention would make it better. Okay. Right, and then you get the opposite. So there's a very famous story about Abraham Joshua Heschel, who's our teacher, great seminary professor. One Shabbos, he's walking home from shul with a student of his, which he did frequently. And there's a beggar on the street. The beggar comes up and says, yo, bro, can you give me $1 for a sandwich? And Heschel puts his hand on the gentleman's shoulder and he says, my friend, my brother, it's the Shabbos. And it's my conviction not to carry money on the Shabbos. But if you'll meet me back here tomorrow, I'll make sure that I have that $1 for you. Same time, meet me here tomorrow. And the beggar looked back at the rabbi and he said, Rabbi, I don't need the $1. You called me your brother. And that matters more than any $1 anybody could have given me. And that's a case in which the intention of the act, in a certain way, overcame even the emptiness of the fact that he didn't have the $1. So the way that I treat the human being is really part of the ethical action. All right, ladies and gentlemen, once again, Sunday night is Shavuot. We're going to be learning together. Go on VBS's website, register, join us at the shul for our tikkun. If you can't come online, you can join us there. We're going to be teaching online so you can hear us. Monday, we have services in person. Tuesday, we have services online, including Yisker. If you want to say Yisker in person, Tuesday afternoon at 6 o'clock, Yossi is going to daven Mincha, and he'll do Yisker again during Mincha services, okay? Otherwise, we'll be back next week. It'll be our closing session of the questions that don't go away. Thank you so very, very much to everyone. Take good care. If you haven't gotten the vaccine, for God's sakes, please go get vaccinated. It'll make your life free. If you have gotten the vaccine, come, let's dance. Take good care.
Thank you, Rabbi.